All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to our virtual event space. My name is Allie, and I'm your host for this evening. I'm so excited to be introducing Alex Bezzerides and Dan Riskin here to discuss Alex's new book, Evolution Gone Wrong. So before we get into the fun stuff, I just want to say a quick thank you to all of you tuning in and, of course, for buying books. I'm seeing the chat already. Hello, welcome. So, for those of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area, and your support really is what keeps us going, and we really love what we do. So if you also love what we do, we would so appreciate it if you swing by and grab some copies, or if you're not local, we do ship. Shipping is just $3.50 for the first book and $1 for every book after that. And I, of course, will be linking books in the chat all evening. So if you want to check this book out, they should be easy to find. So while you're over on our website, I definitely recommend checking out some of our other upcoming events or sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about upcoming events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, you can follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. So we are here for about an hour, and towards the end of the evening, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which I very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box. It'll be down at the bottom or up at the top of your screen. It is different than the chat box. The chat is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other, but when it comes time for questions, do make sure those end up in the Q&A box so that we can most easily find them. And I believe that that is all of my housekeeping. So without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce Alex Bezzerides, a professor of biology at Lewis Clark State College in Idaho, where he teaches a wide range of biology classes from human anatomy and physiology to entomology, and has authored scientific articles in journals such as Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and Behavioral Ecology and Sociobiology. His newest book, Evolution Gone Wrong, is an eye-opening look at why our bodies work or don't work the way that they do. In conversation tonight, I'm so happy to welcome Dan Riskin, a bat scientist, TV host, and author who, after many years as a scientist, focused on the biomechanics of bats, has turned his focus towards bringing science to popular audiences. He's best known as the host of Animal Planet's hit show about parasites, Monsters Inside Me, and is a regular contributor to CTV across Canada. His best-selling first book is called Mother Nature is Trying to Kill You, and his first kids book, Fiona the Fruit Bat, is coming soon. So thank you both so much for being here. I'm so excited to be a fly on the wall for this conversation. If you need anything, of course, give me a shout. I will be listening, and that goes for everyone in chat as well. And with that, welcome, Dan and Alex.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, this is going to be fun. All right. Yeah, thank you for that, Allie. So, okay, I'm like the host or the interviewer. So my name is Dan Riskin. I'm a scientist, but most of the time I'm a science communicator. So I'm always happy when I see a new book show up in the landscape that's going to make my job a little easier because it's got a bunch of good examples and stuff. Evolution Gone Wrong is that book. It just showed up in the landscape, and lo and behold, it's written by a very good friend of mine. So this is a real thrill. I'm excited because I have this now at my fingertips, and now I get to talk to Alex Bezzerides. Now, as mentioned, Alex, biology professor, he's a writer. He got hooked on biology when he did a 2-week summer outdoor field class in the mountains of Colorado in high school. He's from the West. He is the West. He went to Colorado State University. Then he begrudgingly went east, did his PhD at Cornell University. Then he got his first academic job in Wisconsin, but eventually that magnetic pull pulled him back out west, and now he's at Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston, Idaho, and he teaches all kinds of things and is a fancy-dancy professor. Now, I know Alex very well because we were grad students at Cornell at the same time. We met because I think the beginning was we were both TAs for 103, right? Is that what it was?
It was intro bio, whatever intro bio.
Yeah, 103, 104. I think because it was a September. So I think it was anyway, we were intro bio course, and then we started hanging out quite a bit. We always hung out on Fridays because there was a whole thing about grad students drinking beer on Fridays. But here's the thing. There's this, if you've ever heard of a TV show called The Office, Alex, you've heard of The Office, I imagine?
Of course, there's
Do
the
they have
British
that in
one.
Idaho?
There's
Yeah.
two of them.
Yeah, exactly. So you know where this is going. So Andy Bernard, played by Ed Helms, always on that show tells everyone that he went to Cornell. So my brother is always giving me a hard time and saying that I am basically him. And in one episode, he talks about how much he loved to frisbee golf at Cornell. He says, I live to frolf. And well, Alex literally taught me how to frolf at Cornell. So, and then since then, like he's kept it up. He's designed and helped build frolf courses in Wisconsin and Idaho and Washington. So by extension, what I'm basically saying is that Alex is probably the inspiration for Ed Helms' character on The Office.
Yeah, that's great.
I don't think that's much of a reach. And so by extension, Alex is responsible for Ed Helms' career and his success. And by extension, if you liked the movie The Hangover, you're going to love this book. I think that's just a logical series of statements there. So welcome, Alex. You're lagging a little bit. I don't know if you're speechless.
References connect. They
Oh,
can
there we
froze
go.
on me. Can you hear me?
There we go. Now we're seeing things a little good.
Got you back. All right. Well,
Perfect.
we'll see. Worst case, I'll be reading out of the book. Congrats on the book, by the way, Alex. This is great.
Thank you so much.
It looks really
been a
good.
lot.
Yeah, and it's really well written. I dove into it, and I was like, because there's some bad writing out there. Like I've read a lot of popular science books, and sometimes you're like,
Oh boy.
I want to be supportive, I want to be nice, but this one's actually, it really is well written, which isn't a surprise because I know you and I know you you're like a good communicator and stuff, and you're a good teacher. But it was a relief.
I appreciate that. You know, I took 6 years to do it, so it'd be pretty frustrating if I got to the end of that and it was a piece of garbage.
Well, listen, it happens to good people. There are good people who just don't, they try. But anyway, you crushed it. It's really great. It's a lot of fun to read. So here's my plan for the next hour is I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. And then, when we get to the last 15 minutes, we'll get to the Q&A. But honestly, like a little bit, if you're in the audience and something comes to your mind and you have a question, like just write it in the Q&A and maybe I'll see it. I've got the little window here. So if you want to jump in, maybe it'd be like the equivalent of putting your hand up. So just go for it. And if I ignore you, then whatever, we'll get to it when we get to the Q&A. But don't feel rude if you're writing your question ahead of time. Okay, Alex, so if someone doesn't know this book and doesn't know you and is just like, walks into the room, they've showed up here at the bookstore and they're like, what's this about? How would you describe this book? What is the way you describe this to somebody who doesn't have any frame of reference?
Yeah, my elevator pitch is that it's about the aches and pains of the body and how they came to be. So there's all these places in our bodies that don't work quite as well as we might expect. Like our teeth don't fit very well in our mouths, and like you're wearing glasses, and like, which means you have to correct your vision. And we all choke a little bit, like when the water tries to go down the wrong pipe. Like there's all these just little things that some of them are kind of annoyances and some of them can kill us. And I was really curious to know how those things came to be. Like, why is birth such a nightmare for so many women? And why do so many people have their knees blow out, and all these different topics? And so that's kind of the inspiration for the book. Of course, there's like, you could write a book about all the amazing ways that evolution has like led us down this path, these incredible minds and these adroit hands. And like, but I sort of felt like that book had been written, and I kind of wanted to explore the other side of the coin.
Yeah, totally. And I think, when you learn about evolution, it's the things that don't work that well that become much more interesting, right? I mean, that's where you learn how the process works, because when it doesn't work, you can kind of see the nuts and bolts behind it.
Yeah. It took me a long time to get to that point because anatomy and physiology is pretty complicated. So it took a number of years just to sort of piece together how it works when it is working the way it's supposed to, before
Right.
I started to think about when things kind of go off the rails,
Yeah, no, I love this picture. I think it might be the first picture in the book. It's the one of the teeth.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull this up. I don't know what page it's on. Maybe
I can do it. I can just screen share it.
Okay, screen share it.
Here we go.
It's page 4.
Thank you. That's helpful. Give me a thumbs up when you can see what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, right there. So
There
for
it
me,
is.
this was one of the first sort of inspirations for the whole idea. Was we always show this book out, this picture out of a textbook, these 32 perfect teeth, and they're all fitting in the mouth just brilliantly, and everything just looks nice. And then as I talk about it on this page, like I talked to my class, and I was like, all right, everybody raise their hand, and then all right, lower your hand if you've had wisdom teeth pulled, and that knocks out like half of people. And then all right, lower your hand if you've had braces, and now you're down to like 3 or 4 people in this huge class. And it's pretty rare to meet somebody that has 32 teeth all fitting perfectly into their mouth with a nice straight smile. My brother's one of the only people on earth I've ever met that meets that description. And so I kind of paused then for the first time and thought, well, never, like, why is that? Why don't our teeth fit in our mouth? So I started reading about it, and the answers are just fantastically interesting and involve all these cultural things, and like when humans first started to make fire is a big part of it, and using tools and pots, and so it went well beyond just anatomy, which I thought this is really, really cool, and I started to write some of it down, and then kind of just snowballed from there.
So, I mean, the book kind of starts with this example, and you talk about your anatomy class. Is that kind of where this all got rolling? Was your experience trying to teach the human body to people and finding those significant differences between what it's supposed to do and what it actually does?
Yeah, and also just like figuring out what keeps students awake for most of the time, because when you spend most of your time teaching, you get a lot of immediate feedback about what is engaging and what is not. Like when people are just sleeping in the back row or like texting in their pocket, which they're like totally doing all the, then all right, this isn't really working. So I kept finding these topics like this one where everybody's kind of head would come up, and we'd talk for a while about like, well, why don't you think our teeth fit in our mouths? And the students would really get engaged with that kind of thing. And so it was sort of born out of the classroom. I just went from the classroom back up to the office and started to read more about it and write about it. And then I found all these other places in the body that don't work as well as you might think, and started to kind of put together an organization that could become a book.
And so it very quickly, it was very clear to you how this was going to be a book. And so is that like the beginning of the 6 years of writing, or have you already been writing for a while, trying to get something off the ground, and then finally this comes together?
I had no idea what I was doing because it was the first time, and I'm the kind of person, I'll just dive in and then figure out all the mistakes I'm making as I go. So I spent a year writing a draft of the tooth chapter and the eye chapter and maybe a little bit of the throat. And then at some point, my wife, Julie, who's a Spanish professor at the same college, she said, like maybe you should spend like 10 minutes like reading about how you actually go about publishing and like writing a book. I was like, all right, fine. So I did that, and I was just going to write the whole thing because I thought that's what you did. And it turns out that's what you do in the fiction world. You write the whole thing and then try and get it published, but it's totally different in the nonfiction world. Like you write a book proposal that includes a couple of chapters and all these different sections about why somebody's going to actually buy the book and why you're the right person to write the book, and some outlines. And so year 2 was writing the proposal, because I was teaching, like 80% of my job is teaching. So I really just dedicated Thursdays to doing this. I knew if I made it Friday, I would blow it off.
Right.
So I made it Thursday and put some classes on Friday so that I was less likely to blow it off.
Yeah.
And so then the second year was putting the proposal together. And then after that, I felt like, all right, I had come to learn that what you have to do is get an agent. And then I got a great agent on board. Cool. And then I got under contract, and then took, just a little blink of 4 more years to wrap it up.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Yeah.
Well, so you've got the book open, and so while it's open, why don't you read a little bit to us from the book?
Sure.
You've got a chunk picked out that is not from the mouth.
The first section.
I'll mute myself while you go here.
The first section of the book is all about the head and neck. There's chapters about the tooth-jaw mismatch and the shortcomings of the human eye, and then one on why it's so common for us to choke. And then the whole middle section is musculoskeletal issues. There's a chapter on knee problems and foot problems and back pain. So I'm gonna jump to the middle section and read to you, looking for page 148, read to you a section from the foot chapter. And this requires a little bit of introduction. I'll get there. Just going backwards. Here we are. All right, so we're in this section in the foot chapter, why humans suffer from foot pain so commonly. And the title of this section is March of the Plantagrades. So the introduction that you need here is that you need to know that mammals get around in terms of how they walk in 3 different ways in terms of how the foot strikes the ground. So in some of them, the whole foot, like the entire foot, the sole of the foot, the ball of the foot, everything touches the ground. And that's called a plantigrade mammal. And that's what I'm going to describe here. And then we'll get into the other kinds in the next section. So here we go. March of the plantigrades. There are quite a number of other mammals that, like humans, use plantigrade locomotion, including bears, rodents, weasels, and raccoons. Plantigrade locomotion is a very stable way of getting around. I cannot think of anything more stable than a bear. But it also cuts down on speed. Don't get me wrong, bears are not slow. They're just not as fast as cheetahs and antelopes. A plantigrade foot has many bones down at the end of the leg, and all those bones drag the leg down, kind of like a heavy ball at the end of a chain. All the contact between those bones and the ground also make it such that plantigrade animals do not have the natural spring of animals with other gaits. The fence of a bear's enclosure had better be thick, but it does not need to be tremendously tall. None of the plantigrade mammals are champion sprinters. Many of them have whole other defense systems necessitated by their comparatively slow natures. Bears are big and tough, problem solved. Some plantigrade animals, like porcupines, have ridiculously prickly adornments. Other plantigrades, like skunks, deter predators by stinking to high heaven. Plantigrade animals, like wolverines, get away with their lack of speed by being total recluses, and also by being really frickin' mean. Some animals with plantigrade locomotion, like snowshoe hares, are in fact incredibly fast, but it's because they cheat and switch away from plantigrade locomotion while running. The somewhat odd group of plantigrade mammals are the primates. Humans and our thumbed friends get around in a variety of plantigrade ways, with some, like the great apes, going so far as to having both the heel and the sole of the foot strike the ground. Other primates have adopted hybrid forms of locomotion, somewhere between plantigrade and the other styles in which animals are more up on their toes. Primates do take great advantage of the flexibility that all those different foot and hand bones provide. Primates have around 50% of their bones just in their hands and feet, and all those moving parts allow us to tie our shoes, peel oranges, and fling feces at each other, if you're into that kind of thing. And there's a footnote here. As an aside, I know at least some little humans are into that kind of thing. I have a friend with a couple of boys who shared a bedroom when they were growing up. When the little brother was a toddler and not yet potty trained, he would wake up in the night, reach into his diaper, and fling the contents far and wide. I've always thought that was a pretty baller move, especially with your older brother in the room. The mom solved the problem by putting his pajamas on backwards, which kept him from being able to undo them and get to the ammo. It's a life hack they do not teach in parenting classes. Getting back to feet, humans get themselves into trouble because we push the locomotory limits of a plantigrade foot. We ask a foot built for stability and modified for flexibility to take a pounding by traveling over long distances. You will note that there are no great primate migrations around the globe. The primate foot does not specialize in walking across continents like the foot of a wildebeest or zebra. We also exacerbate the issue by getting around on only 2 feet. If we had stuck with the grooming and poop flinging, like the other primates, our feet would be a whole lot happier. Ballerina giraffes. Nothing ever stays the same except cockroaches and sharks, and mammals became way too diverse a group to stick with only one style of locomotion. In digitigrade locomotion, only the toes contact the ground. This is how cats and dogs roll. The heavier bones are farther away from the ground, losing the ball and chain effect of plantigrades. Instead of contacting the ground, like in a human, the metatarsals, the bones between the toes and the ankle, act like a giant spring. It is quite a different challenge to construct an enclosure for a mountain lion than it is for a bear, because pumas can jump 4.5 meters or 15 feet up in the air and leap 12.2 meters or 40 feet while running. Digitigrade locomotion makes for a lot of natural spring and speed. Human sprinters do their best to mimic digitigrades by wearing special shoes to place them up onto their toes while running. The situation is tenable only over short distances, as it causes a lot of strain on the calf muscles. I learned this the hard way when, as a distance runner for one painful year in high school, I unknowingly bought sprint shoes and spent an entire track season attempting to run long distances in shoes made for running 100 or 200 meters. I did not realize until after the final meet, that I had been running kilometer after kilometer in sprint shoes. I just thought my sore calves needed to get stronger. Then there are the hoofed mammals, the ungulates, with their crazy unguligrade locomotion. They go one step further and contact the ground with giant toenails we call hooves. Most of the bones we think of as foot bones in humans are part of the lower leg of ungulates. I remember a time when the unusual nature of ungulate legs sparked an animated discussion with a biologist friend of mine. We were at a touristy place with carriage-ride horses and debating the position of the horse's knee, meaning the intersection of the femur with the tibia and fibula in the rear leg. What looks like the knee of a horse is actually the ankle. The knee is much higher up than most people realize. To complicate and confuse the situation even more, people who work with horses use the word knee to describe what is the equivalent of the horse's wrist. Having most of the bones stuffed up in the leg makes the foot fantastic at taking a beating. The unguligrades are the champions of long-distance walking. From zebras to wildebeests to antelopes, animals walking on their tippy toes carry out most of the classic terrestrial great animal migrations. A sneaky fast digitigrade chases them from time to time, but if they avoid being lion bait, they keep plodding along on their feet, which are perfect for walking all day. This means ungulates are walking around like ballet dancers, on point their entire lives. My daughter wanted a ballerina giraffe themed birthday party a couple of years ago. It seemed to me like an odd combination at the time, but obviously she was celebrating, in her own way, the tremendous spectacle of unguligrade locomotion in giraffes. Others must feel the same way, as we were able to find a surprisingly diverse array of ballerina giraffe party supplies. The birthday theme last year was rainbow unicorns, which I can only assume, if they existed, would also walk on the tips of their toes, like horses. This year, she's pushing for a mermaid theme. Again, not a real thing, but as seagoing mammals, if mermaids were real, they would probably have evolved from the same ancestors as whales and dolphins. Whale and dolphin ancestors were, you guessed it, ungulates. I guess the girl just has a thing for cryptozoological animals descended from ungulates. And here's an example of one of the great illustrations in the book. So there's our plantagrade mammal, the bear, the digitigrade, the cheetah with his track shoes on, up on his toes, and the unguligrade, the giraffe, on point in the ballet slippers with a tutu. These are drawn by my incredible illustrator, Peter Davidson, who we sprinkled the book with as many illustrations as we could get away with. And I just think they really, really add to the whole thing. I just love them.
That's great. Is that the end of the excerpt?
That's the end of the excerpt.
Oh, that's great. Yay. I'm applauding it. We were in a bookstore physically. Some of us may be in bookstores, but
I've only ever done these virtually, so I didn't even know.
Yeah, well, that's the pandemic. I mean, the whole idea of having springs built into your leg is so cool, right? You see a kangaroo and it bounces like that because it's got these springs. And so, speaking of pandemics, we had the annoyance. I won't even say misfortune because people have had a harder time than we have in this pandemic. But we had the misfortune of being told by the province that there had been an exposure in the school, and my kids and I had to sort of stay in the house for 2 weeks, and so the kids couldn't leave our property for 2 weeks, and so we bought a trampoline because it was either that or the couch, right? But anyway, it's when you see the kids jumping on the trampoline, like they just can't stop bouncing. And what that is a giant spring that they are recoiling off of. And it occurred to me that is mechanically equivalent to what it's like to be a kangaroo. It's just that for a kangaroo, the spring's built into the leg. But for a kangaroo to jump on the ground must feel the way it feels for a kid to jump on a trampoline.
It's a wonder they ever stop, right?
I know. Why do that pentapedal locomotion they do when they're going slowly? Like, why would you ever do that? But anyway, and it's fun for people. And people always wonder if whales jump out of the water because that's fun for them. But you have to think bouncing along, even just an unguligrade mammal going fast like a horse, it must feel like you're running on springs. It must be so fun, like a pogo stick.
Got to be awesome. I remember the first time I saw a mountain lion skeleton and just looking at the foot. I mean, those metatarsals are just they're giant, they're really long, and the whole thing is it just looks like they could just bounce, like 20, many feet up in the air. It's just,
and they
totally
do.
Different. Yeah, it makes us feel very plodding.
Your point about the difference between the enclosure you would need for a bear versus the enclosure you need for a puma, that's clever. That's a good one. I like that. I'm going to totally steal that and use that when I'm talking to people
You
about
do it.
foot stuff. Well, that's fun. And so, I mean, it's written in your voice. Do you, as part of your process, did you read it out loud? You must have. It comes off that way, that you can't possibly achieve that just reading it in your head.
Yeah, I would take a draft and I would slowly, so I'd print it so that I could get out of my office. I just think that's really important to just get away from the screen and just get outside. And then I would just sort of mindlessly walk the blocks kind of around campus, reading it to myself out loud and just kind of looking up every now and again to make sure I wouldn't get hit by a car. But I spent a lot of time doing that. Even in the winter, I just bundle up and wander around with my one chapter draft, and kind of read it that way. But you're right. I just give such kudos to the editors because obviously we went through many, many, many drafts, but I feel like at the end of that, my voice was still very much in it. And I applaud them for that, because it's not easy to rein things in when they need to be reined in and tighten things up and keep the author's voice. And they did a great job of that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely in your voice. It's you can hear it. Although it's especially nice when you read it out loud, because you just have a little bit of a, you don't emphasize things as much as I do when I read things. I like really hit words and draw them out, and you kind of just stroll on through and like let those jokes just hit you when you don't see them coming. Anyway, it's funny. And so the poop flinging, that is a good trick to turn the pajamas backwards. That's
pretty, right? Yeah, that's from the computer scientist that I work with. She's got these two boys that are just, one older brother, younger brother phenomenon. I can't believe I didn't ever think of it, because I shared a room with my brother for a while, but my parents would have to chime in the chat, but I don't think I ever flung any poop
threw feces at your sibling
to tag my brother. Though I wish I could go back in time. I'd probably do a little bit just to be mischievous.
Yeah, I feel like that is not the end of the battle, though. I feel like it escalates from there, right? Like then it's blood. Like it gets way worse. So one thing is that do you think that you're picking on humans more than other animals, or do you think that if we looked carefully at pumas and bears, that we would find these kinds of issues? Because it seems like whenever you find a skull of an animal, the teeth look pretty good.
I think that humans are uniquely prone to these types of issues, mostly because of environmental mismatch. We just, in our evolutionary history, we just never seem to be satisfied just sticking in the same environment for, so our ancestors go from sea to land, and then they go from land to trees, and then all the trees aren't working out, so they go from trees back down to land. And it's like they're always switching environments, and that makes it very difficult for the body to be kind of perfectly well adapted to that environment when you're always changing. I think about something like a shark that's just been in the ocean for hundreds of millions of years and stayed in the ocean, and they just have to be supremely adapted to that environment because they haven't switched it up. And I feel like as humans, we're always kind of catching up to whatever, to the environmental changes. And for that, now, of course, other animals have to do that also. I bring up whales and dolphins in the book as a great example of one that, whale and dolphin ancestors I mentioned in that excerpt, they were terrestrial, and then they crawl back in the ocean 50 million years ago, and they have all kinds of goofy anatomy as a result. I mean, their noses moved like from here back to here just to help them come up out of the water to breathe,
Right.
They've got all these kind of funny anatomical quirks also, but they've had a lot longer to work them out than we have. So our major transition from trees to ground is not all that long ago. And I think a lot of our issues are born of that transition.
There's this thing that people love to worry about, that kids are going to be messed up because they have their phones, and so their eyes are no good and their thumbs are too good, and there are all these issues. But honestly, like if you went back to the 1700s or the 1500s or 1,000 years ago or whatever, 2,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, like when did it start getting bad? Or are you talking about problems that probably have been with us as long as we've been humans?
I think some of the problems in the book have been difficult for humans for as long as we've been humans, like childbirth. There are some great studies done by, there's this brilliant paleoanthropologist at Dartmouth named Jeremy De Silva. Just wrote a book called First Steps. And if people like the middle section of this book, I tell them, go read First Steps, because it's all about sort of the transition to bipedalism for humans. And he and his group did this study that showed that when hominins became bipedal, the birth canal kind of in that transition became tight even before the brain swelled up to this giant size. So birth was already, that's 4 million years ago. Birth was already, could be potentially problematic, not for everybody, but certainly a point of selection. And then in the ensuing 2, 3, 4 million years, you swell up the brain, you triple the brain volume. Now you've got all kinds of problems. And then with every sort of issue in the book, I feel like we're kind of set up evolutionarily for trouble, and then we sort of double down on it with modern behavior. And so that's a common theme in the book. Like in the tooth chapter, I think there is a tooth jaw kind of size mismatch because of evolution, but then our kids just eat oatmeal and smoothies and they don't even work their jaw at all while growing up. And if you don't work a jaw, it's not as big and it stays small and it doesn't become as powerful, and the teeth are less likely to fit in it. So there are a lot of things like that where it's a combination of the past and the present. That's a real theme throughout the book.
Right. So it's a combination. And so to put that another way, the way my grandpa used to talk about this stuff, it's nature versus nurture, right? It's part genetics and part environment.
But I think there's zero question that there were hominids running around hunting things 2 million years ago on 2 feet that were spraining their ankles and blowing out their knees. I mean, there's just, I have little doubt that happened. And if that happened to, that's in those moments, it really helped to live in a group.
Yes.
Your buddy.
Yeah. And maybe that's part of the reason we've accumulated so many of these things is because we're group animals, and we can, people go and help me find my food for me because I have these glasses.
That's right.
Yeah. And so we're afforded that flexibility as group animals. It'd be interesting to look across species to see if you could quantify if group species accumulate more of these problematic deals.
And just propensity for, like, maybe not chronic injury, but just acute injuries. Because I mean, you can't, if you have a chronic injury, like, I'm probably not going to help you out forever 2 million years ago if I have to go get your food every time. Right. Like, as long as you can scratch my back a month later, 2 months later, then you would be likely to help somebody else, and that would be interesting to look at.
I bet you could do something with like healed bones or something like that, and look at that. But anyway, that's getting off on a tangent. But it's a sign of a great book because it brings up all these questions and makes you start thinking about other stuff, right? I mean, it's exciting. It's really hard to find like a good book. It is very hard to find that topic that is a concise ball of information that's going to fit into one volume. I think it's nice that you've really nailed that, right? Like it's a thing with an obvious size to it. You're not just carving a little wedge of a giant pie. It's the human body.
I really appreciate that. And at the college, for years, we did this thing called the Common Read program, where every student in every biology class, this is from like non-majors, human bio, for the business students, up through biochem, a 400 level class for graduating seniors, they would all read the same book, and we'd choose a book, that was, so we read like The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and we read Your Inner Fish, and we read Zubiquity, books like that, The Violinist's Thumb, and it was difficult every semester to sit down and get the biologist to get on the same page and choose a good book that our students would enjoy reading, because you're right, they're sadly kind of few and far between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'd think there'd be more, but also, like, I don't know, I was doing some research on human evolution, and I read a book by an expert in the field, and it was like by the third chapter, I was like, somebody kill me. And then I picked up a book by Carl Zimmer, who writes for the New York Times, and like I just burned through 500 pages like that, and I was like, well, thank you. I mean, it makes such a difference. I have my questions kind of listed over here. Let me have a look. So actually, you know what, you brought this up, so I'm going to jump ahead to that question. Let's talk about childbirth, because I feel like in my life, I've had like certain levels of stress and like experiences, but then when I had my first kid, and I didn't give birth, my wife did, but when we had Sam, like the birth did not go according to plan, right? Like, so the umbilical cord was stuck or something, and she was pushing forever, and then it was a C-section, then he wouldn't breathe, and then they got him to breathe, and I aged like 20 years in one day. Like, it was the most stressful, scary thing ever. And it really, like, so for me, this whole childbirth thing is very visceral, and I'm, I'm not even someone who can ever give birth. Is it really such a standalone, like it's the pinnacle of this whole thing that, or is it really just part of the whole system to you?
I'll start by saying I think there's a ton of variability. I think there are some, you hear stories of women that give birth in the hall on the way down, give birth on the way to the hospital because it just is not, that it's just not that big a deal for some women. But you don't talk to very many women before quickly running into some birth stories where nothing went according to plan. It's not an anomaly. If not the norm, it's definitely a decent chunk of them. And I do think it's kind of where it's just a perfect storm of nature and nurture and a place where evolution has kind of led us down this path that gives us difficulties. It's everything I talked about from the transition to bipedalism through the huge brain. And the thing that I don't think it's talked about that much is in the modern world, many women are able to put their bodies and then as a consequence, their newborn, their fetus in a position from a nutrition perspective that has just never happened before. We just have access to such better nutrition. So then we already have big heads and we're sort of growing the largest babies that the world has ever known. And you just reach this pinch point where it's almost gotten to the point where it's very, very difficult for some women to get them to even come out to the world.
I think a lot of people, especially around childbirth and about being a parent, there's a lot of feeling of being judged, right? There's a lot of oh, you didn't breastfeed. That's interesting. Or, oh, well, you had a C-section. Oh, you had an epidural. Not sure. Yeah. And, this natural childbirth idea, this idea that if you're being natural, everything's going to go just fine. Don't worry about it. Let Mother Nature take care of you. So what's your perspective on that?
We quickly developed about 3 or 4 rules as parents. The first one, of course, was when the baby sleeps, you sleep. And very shortly down the list was just you just can't judge other parents for any decisions that they make because you're not living their life. Of course, right. They can't be abusing the children, but short of that, I'm not going to. You do you for sleep schedule or feeding schedule or how you feed or whatever you do, because everybody's experience is different. And like you said, we went in with a plan and the plan just kind of gets chucked out the window and it just becomes survival. And for many women, it becomes literally survival. I knew birth could be traumatic for women, but I started reading about sort of the historical aspect of it. And before antibiotics, there's just so much. I didn't know that a woman's body they gain so much blood. They just make so much extra blood during pregnancy. And a big part of it is that the body is getting ready to just lose this unbelievable volume of blood. And before antibiotics, that tearing and trauma could lead to infection. And so many women died and still do in the process of childbirth. It's just mind-boggling. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's, beyond that, what about parenting? So now you're a dad and so how long have you been a dad now? How old?
So when you read the book, because I took so long to write it, she's really little, she's throwing fits about not being able to go outside in her bare feet in the middle of winter, and now she's, we're living in Mexico. She's learning Spanish. She's in 2nd grade. She's teaching me how to do a ball change tonight because she's doing a dance class. And I'm like,
nice.
So she's 8 now. She's in 2nd grade.
Cool.
But I was influenced by some of these topics as we went through the chapter on choking. I knew that people's tracheas and windpipes were pretty small, but when I read the chapter about just how many kids die from choking on hot dogs and grapes, you can bet I was just destroying every grape that she got to eat for several years. She's only recently exactly. She's only recently graduated to the stage where I'll let her eat a grape, now she's 8, without cutting it up in 19 pieces.
Right. Yeah. Cause you sort of feel a little bit more vulnerable, don't you? When you realize
sure. Once you get in and read these papers that are just written in black and white about the number of kids that are dying from food and non-food objects, it really drives the point home that you need to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes from I know a person, which is true for a lot of stuff, to things you don't necessarily have to have met a person, but then you find it in literature and you're like, oh, this is terrifying. This is too much. So what was the hardest part to write? What was the hardest piece for you to write out of like the most challenging section? And why was it challenging?
Yeah, I was kind of just moving along through the first and second sections because going into them, I had an idea of where it was headed. And so outlining them wasn't that difficult. It was a matter of just getting into the primary lit and digging into it and then coming up with a good way to tell the story. And then I got to the first chapter of the reproduction section. So the last section is all about reproduction. And I wanted to lead with a chapter on menstruation. And that just stopped me dead in my tracks because I was like, well, for starters, I don't have any firsthand experience to draw on here, which I did with many of the other chapters. I had blown out my knee. My back gives me a little trouble from time to time. You know, I was going into braces, have since come out of them, you know. And then I get to the menstruation chapter. So, and right away, I start reading this term just right when I'm outlining this term, spontaneous decidulization. And that just kind of blew
Say that again?
It's spontaneous decidulization. Okay. And that just kind of blew my hair back. And I had to dig in and figure out. So what that means is that humans and a select few other mammals, it's definitely the minority that do this. They change their uterine lining. Instead of in response to pregnancy, most mammals just change the uterine lining in response to pregnancy. They get pregnant, then the uterus does all its changes to facilitate the pregnancy. But in humans and a few select other mammals, the cells of the uterine lining change in preparation for pregnancy. So that's why it's called spontaneous. So they decidualize, which is just a fancy way of saying they change. The cells change in preparation for pregnancy. And that's effectively the trick to the whole menstruation chapter, because so then I go down this path of like, well, why do that? And I talk about all those hypotheses. And that was tricky. I mean, the first thing I had to do was get myself to understand it. And then I had to figure out how to explain it I want the audience to be broad. I want it to be accountants and coaches and like people that aren't biologists. You know, I want people that are not biologists to be able to read the book. And so you have to get in there and how do you describe this process that is pretty nitty gritty physiologically. And so then I started to work with these different, like, all right, we're baking a cake metaphors and like doing all these things to like build into the chapter. And in the end, it's the most satisfying chapter for me because it was the most challenging one from the beginning, but it's the one I've gotten good feedback on it. And I probably learned more writing that chapter than any other, which is just super fun. That was the whole point to begin with for me, was that if I published it, great, but like I wasn't that hung up on that in the beginning. I just was learning all these cool new things and wanted to write them down, you know?
Well, it's like, you know, if you want to learn something, you teach it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's how it goes. And so this is, I mean, so when we were hanging out together, you were working on scientific papers, of course. And so like promiscuity of moths, was it? Is it like just judging moths for how many sex partners they have? You really come up
no judgment.
From, Okay. Yeah. But so how different was the learning in terms of going from, because you know, you'd think that a scientific paper, you'd learn a ton. In popular audience, it feels like it's watered down somehow. But how did those compare in terms of how much your brain had to take in?
I think the transition from academic to popular writing, it was pretty smooth for me because of all the teaching. I think all the teaching, you sort of are having to hit that in the middle anyway. Like you have to keep the content and keep the rigor, but at the same time, you have to kind of make it as interesting and as engaging as possible, which is not really the goal with the academic writing. So that I don't think was difficult for me, but there were certainly struggles. Like with academic writing, I had spent for all of that work, you're writing in the passive voice. So the example I always give for people that don't know what that means, like the passive voice, the example I use is the rat was eaten by the dinosaur. Like I just kind of keep that on a Post-it, like stuck to my computer with like an X through it, like not to write. So, that's passive voice. The rat was eaten by the dinosaur. And that's how you write scientific papers. You say the experiment, the lights were turned on at 7 a.m. in the morning and the insects were fed this diet, and it's all in this passive voice. Well, I wrote 90,000 words. Like I wrote the whole book in passive voice because that's all I'd ever done before. And I sent the first draft off to the editors and they wrote back that they're like, wow, this is really great. We're really liking it. Just please switch the whole book to active voice. And, so the active voice is the dinosaur ate the rat rather than the rat was
Yes.
eaten by the dinosaur. So you don't do that in academic writing. We turned on the insects, it's all passive voice. So that was a struggle. That's a mistake I will not make again.
Does it feel weird to write?
I'm getting used to it, but it was kind of a rookie mistake. You got to make some rookie mistakes. So that was one for me.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And if you don't, then you worry that there's something, nobody's correcting you, right? That's the worst. Is like they let you publish it, like, oh, we'll just let this go. But yeah.
By like the third chapter of the first edit, the editor was just like, okay, here's passive voice again. Like, now I'm not going to point it out anymore. It's the rest of the book. Fix it,
Yeah, right. Well, but it's just one mistake that you made through the whole thing. It's like Canadian spelling. That's a mistake I still make. But I live in Canada. It was easier than fixing the problem. I just moved back to Canada. Because when I was in the States, everyone's like, you spelled color wrong. It's like, no, I didn't. Okay, so listen, just looking at the time, it's about 11:45 wherever you are. You can judge your own clocks. It's 11:45 where I am because I'm in Toronto. But so if people have, we haven't gotten any questions yet for the Q&A, but people are welcome. I've still got tons of questions to ask, so you don't have to interrupt the flow, but we'd love to have your questions if you have any.
I'm going to look at the list of participants because can I see the participants? I don't think I can because I know there's some former students in there, and so I would just pester them. I would just make them ask a question, but I can't see who's
former students though, man. You have no sway.
That's true. Lucky for them, I can't see who's on the call.
Go back and change their grades. That'd be fun.
I can't call on them. I will go back.
Yeah, right. Check if you were paying attention. Yeah, so I mean, one big difference is oh, here we go. How did you decide who to interview? A question from Haley Hulse. I don't know if that's a former student.
But... Oh, I know Haley very well. That's a great question, Haley. So for each chapter, I had a few people in mind. I didn't want too many of those. There's not an interview in every chapter. There's sort of one maybe in each section of the book. And honestly, with a topic like I work on the third floor of a building and I have a bunch of math students on my wing, and about 4 of them have had back surgery. So I just went down the hall and interviewed a few of them about their experience with back pain. And then I went to my primary care physician and interviewed him about his experience for back pain. And so I would find people that were close. I didn't have to stretch far and wide. It was never like 5 degrees of separation. It was always like, all right, I know somebody that's been through this, and I would talk to them. And then I'd interview them, and then I'd write it up, and then I would just choose which one of those I felt worked best and which sort of flowed nicely into the story. So there are 3 or 4 of those kind of just sprinkled throughout the book to mix in some more personal. And some of it, for some of it, I just talk about myself, like when I blew out my knee or whatever, and then I talk about my going through that, an ACL reconstruction myself. But in other cases, I needed something a little more.
You drag yourself through the mud a bit, but you also drag your brother with you.
That's right.
Already in this conversation, you've talked about the fact that you wish you'd thrown more poop at him as a child.
Yeah.
But you also have a funny story about trying to light a fire with him. And I liked what you did there because in the book, you make fun of yourselves for trying to light a fire. And then you talk about how all these apes aren't as clever as humans. But then you finish it by saying, but then some of us humans are still trying to light 2x4s with a match. Yeah. And so what was your brother's reaction to the book when he or has he read it? In which case I'm with you. You should throw poop at him.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I think he's reading it right now, and I didn't catch him by surprise at all. I shared with him those sections and got us on the same page. And it's one of my earliest memories, just sitting in the garage and sneaking into the kitchen to steal the matches. And yeah, it's not true. It's definitely not a simple thing for a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old to pull off without accelerants. And luckily, if there were any in the garage, we didn't know about accelerants. And I've met plenty of. I feel like I live in the West. You have to you should start a campfire. Any self-respecting Westerner can start a campfire once they get to be an adult. But I've met plenty of people that still struggle with this skill as an adult. So you're right. It's not trivial.
Question from anonymous attendee. Interesting that despite evolution gone wrong, human lifespan has increased over time. Is it all due to advances in medicine? That's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I think the two pieces of that would be the nutrition aspect, access to just regular and if you choose to do it, incredibly high quality nutrition, and then the technology piece of it. And it seems to be showing no end in sight, and is so I tried to focus in the book on issues that can kind of get you from an early age. I didn't want it to just be a book about aging and about issues that people run into when they're 70, 80, 90 years old. But certainly the issues in the book are not helped by age. Like your eyes are not getting any better as you get older. People's back, I always come back to the back. The back is, once you get into the book, you'll see that the back pain is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Huh. And it's one of those things, if you get to be 50 years old and haven't had any back pain up to that point, you're the exception rather than the rule. And as you move forward from that point, it just gets harder and harder to live a life free of back pain. That chapter for me, so you asked sort of like changes to parenting, based on that chapter, for me has been inspirational to try and just keep my core strong and your muscles strong, so that, because that, after interviewing my physician, that it seems like that's kind of the trick to the whole thing. You can keep the shape of your spine. You're more likely to keep it where it's supposed to be if you keep all those muscles strong.
That's so interesting. So do you lift a lot of weights to take care of your body, or do you run, or do you do nothing, which is like how I remembered you, but you were young when I knew you.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I've added a minimal amount of playing, like doing a few, he thought planks were a really good way to just kind of, I mean, I'm always looking for stuff that I can do in like 2 minutes, and if you plank for a minute or two, you're going to flat feel it. So, I do stuff that I can fit it into a small amount of time. And so far at this point, that's been enough for me to keep everything healthy. But the older you get, I feel like it just all becomes maintenance, right? You just need to be able to spend more and more and more time just dedicating, keeping your body in good shape, because it just gets harder the older you get.
Right. And so when you're going about, I mean, do these themes just sort of echo in your mind all the time, or have you has it changed the way you sort of go about your life, or the way you think about mortality, or the way you think about humanity?
Yeah, I kind of curse my trachea and my esophagus and their proximity. Anytime like a little bit of something goes down, you kind of sputter and choke. I'm just like, really? Like, seriously, we're doing this again? So there are a lot of things like that where I will never view it the same way. I mean, that even, the book's had an influence on that. I'm kind of moving on to a different topic now. And so now I'm thinking about trying to, if more than 8 people buy the book and I get to do it again, I'm thinking of running it back with allergies and autoimmune disorders. So I'm doing all this reading, the sort of the evolutionary origins of those. Why are people allergic to bees, and why do so many people have peanut allergies and dust mites and all these things? So I've been doing a lot of reading about those topics, and that's honestly what's sort of at the top of my every thought these days are those related to those topics.
It's so interesting. And again, it's this what's gone wrong business instead of what's gone right. But, I find sometimes, so usually the audience that I'm thinking about is a TV audience. And a TV audience is very different from a reading audience, because a lot of people who watch TV don't read, and I shouldn't make fun of them.
Bigger audience.
The bigger audience. Well, is it? It depends on the show. If you're on a Canadian Science television network, it's compared to But anyway, it's cool. But like one thing is that sometimes people get tired of hearing about problems that don't have solutions.
Yeah.
And this is like a big thing with the environment and with climate change and stuff like that, is like for a lot of people, they might be on board with the message, but they're like, quit complaining, like, let's solve this. And so do you ever think of solutions to any of these problems that come up, or is it just sort of like, here's what the cards you're dealt and you just got to sort of buck up?
For the most part, I'm trying to just tell you why you're in pain, because I think, for me, it helps a lot if I just know why something is happening. It gives me a lot of peace of mind just to be able to deal with it, and if I just understand it better. It's just sort of that phenomenon, like when somebody gets a disease that they can't put a diagnosis on, even once they just are given a name for it, at least they have something to wrap their head around. Even if there's not a cure, it just brings sort of a different level of understanding to it. And so I'm very upfront in the book. I'm like, I'm not gonna help you that much with some of these things, but you are going to understand why they happen better. For me, the kind of positive balance is I do give a little bit of love to the incredible aspects of human evolution. So I have a whole section about our hands, and obviously, I spend a lot of time talking about how our bodies are kind of wrecked by being up on 2 feet. But the amazing thing with that is like the freeing of the hands has allowed us to do all these incredible things. So I spend some time talking about our grip and what that's done for us, and trying to balance it a little bit with the positive aspects of it.
I think a great book is something that you read and then you see things differently after that. And I think this book has the potential to change people in that way, to make it's like a good Seinfeld joke, right? Once Seinfeld sort of talks about, like, he's got this line about old people driving too slow. And he's like, if anybody should be driving fast, it's old people, right? And it comes to my mind every time I'm stuck behind somebody old in traffic. Like, every time. It's totally changed the way I see the world. And that's what makes Seinfeld's comedy so brilliant. But that it's true for a good science book too, right? And so is that, like, what are you going for? What do you want to change in your audience? If they read this book, what is going to change in their lives compared to before they've read the book?
Yeah, it's a great question. I want them to change how they view their body and how it came to be. I want them to have a better understanding of the parts of it that don't work that well. And these things that they just sort of oh, well, my teeth didn't fit in my mouth. Well, I want them to understand, like, what about our past made it so that your teeth didn't fit in your mouth? And for me, that changes the way I view my body, and that's the goal for me. And if you can get them to learn a little bit about that along the way, while also having for me, it's really important that, like, I've had that experience you talked about, where you pick up a book and the topic seems really interesting, and you get about halfway into the first chapter and you're just drooling on yourself from boredom. And I hate that. And I really wanted to write a book that left people with a positive experience from reading a book. So many young people, especially, I feel like, are not reading as much, as there's so many other things to do, so many things to stream, so many other, that when they do pick up a book, it's a special moment, and you have a chance to grab them and show them what an amazing world books can make for them and be part of their lives. And you don't want to miss it, and that's where it has to be engaging and fun and interesting and entertaining. And so, yeah, if they can, there's a quote on the back by this guy. He wrote the definitive field guide to animal flatulence. It's a quote on the back, and I love his quote. It's like because he talks about how you'll laugh and you'll learn. And for me, that was the whole goal. Will you learn something and have a laugh at the same time? And if I've pulled that off, then I'm happy.
Right on, man. I feel like that's just a great place for us to hang this.
Yeah.
And so anyway, if you're in the audience, I'm sure Allie's going to come back and tell you the same, but do get a copy of this book. And also, it's if you know a kid, like a teenager who is like smart but hates school or whatever, like they're too smart for everybody, like, give them that book. Like your friend's kid or your nephew or your niece or whatever, this book in the hands of a smart kid will change them, right? Like it could make a big difference.
Yeah, I love to think of it getting in the hands of like a high school junior that's kind of just figuring out what they want to do, and they're like, wow, look at this. You can kind of look at the world this way. That's awesome.
No, it's great. Well, congrats again, Alex, on the book. It's beautiful. It's a really fun read. I hope it sells a zillion copies. I'm glad you're working on another one, because clearly this is a great thing for you to be doing. And it was great catching up with you.
It was great catching up with you. Let's do it again soon, Dan.
Yeah, right on.
All right. Well, hi, I'm back. Thank you both for this conversation and for being here. This was such a fun, interesting conversation to be a fly on the wall for. I appreciate you both so much. Audience members, hello. All of you who want to get your hands on a copy of Evolution Gone Wrong, go ahead and follow the links in the chat box. There's that top one is the one to Evolution Gone Wrong. That's the book of the night. Of course, if you are local, come on in, come say hi. We would love to see you. If you are not local, shoot us a tweet. We'd love to hear from you. And I think that is all of my business. So Alex and Dan, one more huge, huge thank you for coming out. And I think that this is where we say good evening. So
thanks so much for having us.
Of course. Let the awkward waving commence, right?
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
See you later.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.